Hey, this is Trevor William Church from Haunt, and you're experiencing Poppitt's Corner.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome, episode 95 of Poppitt's Corner. Yes, this is it. This is the end of the Matt Harvey saga. And of course, I just spoiled it for you. This is part 4. I'd like to bring on my good buddy, Mr. Matt Harvey. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back, Tanner. Thanks for your patience going through all of these records with me, man. It's crazy.
It's all good, man. I'm stoked to do it. I wish we could do a part 5, but
in the future, I'm not dead yet, so
I'm sure next year you have 5 more for me to talk about, so it'll be fun.
2 or 3, hopefully, yeah.
Absolutely. How you been, man? Before we get started, I see you moved the studio around, so.
Yeah, we reconfigured things here. We've been tracking the latest Exhumed record, our 8th album, for those who are keeping track. And we just kind of had to move the workstation because we had the amp station over off camera there by the live workstation. And this is sort of like the demo MIDI workstation. Anyway, I came in after work and the guys had moved it around, and I got kind of pissed for a second, but then I realized this layout is way better. And so now, I would close the door because I know there's a little bit of a glare, but my dog is out there because the concrete is a little colder for her to lay on than the carpet in here. So,
it's all good. It's all good. I like the Chris Farley move. It's like over here and then back over here.
But you can see my framed picture of Heather Thomas back there.
There you go. Yeah. See, now I can see it though because it's closer. So, so where we left off last time was we talked about the Expulsion record, and immediately after, within the same year, you Exhumed had released Death Revenge, and I know Expulsion. It was kind of demo tracks that used your what you had said was your tracks just on the demo versions that they ended up using on the real record. But so I'm not going to ask how you kind of balance your time in between the Exhumed record and that thing. But was there any discrepancies between those two, or was it just right after it was released you guys got started on recording Death Revenge?
Death Revenge, we took a little bit longer between records. I think it was like 3 years between that and Necrocracy. And Necrocracy had taken a really long time to come out as well due to a bunch of problems that I probably talked about last time. So Death Revenge was kind of getting worked on, for a while. And with Expulsion, it really wasn't too much, like I hung out at Matt's house and tracked the vocals that ended up on the record. And so for me, it was just kind of like, I'd heard the songs, obviously, because I wrote the lyrics and stuff. And then at some point in the future, the record just sort of arrived. So for me, it didn't really take up hardly any of my time beyond just writing the lyrics and, whatever it was, like an evening of just tracking vocals. So Death Revenge took a lot longer, though, because it was a concept album, and in that time, Ross came back in the band, and it was just it was a pretty involved process of just putting it together.
So you said Death Revenge was a concept record. I know that some of Necrocracy was kind of conceptualized. It was kind of a concept, right, but it wasn't a full concept record. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, this is probably the next logical step for you personally, just as a musician and songwriter, where you did some sort of concept, but now you translate that into a full concept record. Was that an easier process for you writing style wise? Like you had all the music and you kind of had to just fit around lyrics that would fit into this whole story?
Well, I think, like you said, Necrocracy was sort of loosely conceptual, like the way Master of Puppets is conceptual, like Disposable Heroes, Lover Messiah, Master of Puppets, they're all songs about manipulation. Damage Incorporated and Battery are just songs about rocking. And Necrocracy, like the title track, Coins Upon the Eyes, Dysmorphic, and a few others are sort of political. And then like Sickened is just about getting the plague. Carrion Call is just about rocking. So this was like full like Dimension Hatros, like Abigail, like story with characters. And it was a much kind of it was a pretty difficult record to like creatively. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, I was like tortured or whatever, but it was a real project because basically I sort of loosely kind of defined the story as I wanted to tell it. The record was based on the Burke and Hare anatomy murders in Scotland in the 1820s. And so I had kind of stumbled upon him on Wikipedia. I didn't really know anything about it. And then as I read about it, I was like, you know, I was just looking for stuff to write about for Exhumed. And I was like, there's a lot here, like, holy shit. And it kind of made, I was like, if ever there was something for us to write about for a concept album, this would be the thing. Because it's got like grave robbery and like pathological science. It's got like a kind of evil doctor character. It's got drunken idiots. Like Burke and Hare were not master criminals. Like they were just dipshits, really. And they would kill people by getting them drunk and suffocating them in their boarding house because they were in Scotland, and these people would come from Ireland for work when the crop season was off in Ireland or whatever. And they would come to Edinburgh, they would rent a room for cheap, they would get killed, they would sell their bodies. Nobody would know, their relatives in Ireland would have no idea how to find them. So they were like slightly clever, but mostly they just like got wasted and like killed people. And it just had a lot of stuff that was adjacent to what we'd already sang about and kind of our imagery. And so basically I kind of roughed out like the story beats, and then we had a bunch of music, and then I kind of put the songs in order, in the order of the album, and then sort of figured out which kind of story beat would go with each song. And it was a really different approach actually writing the lyrics, because basically like the album, aside from the first song, the album is basically a musical where I'm singing the Dr. Knox character, Ross is singing the Hare character, and Bud is singing the Burke character. And so really it's all like dialogue, mostly with a little bit of narration as needed. So it was a real challenge to kind of be like, how do we tell a story? How do we make it so even if you don't know anything about the story, if you just pick one song at random, you're going to like the song and the lyrics will be catchy enough to where you'll get something, and it was just a real balancing act between, how far can we take this without turning it into something totally different,
Right.
It is.
And the story kind of reminds me of that H.H. Holmes with what you just said, because it's like, a guy that would literally, you check into the hotel and you'd get killed pretty much. Right. Nobody would know how to find it, and he would end up either selling your body I'm sure many people don't know how many people these people actually killed themselves, which is an even scarier thought,
Yeah, well, it was a tricky situation at the time because anatomy was a really developing science, and people went to Edinburgh to study anatomy. It was like, that was one of the things the city was known for. But because of the religious beliefs, people thought that when Jesus came back, like your body was literally going to rise and be like, cool, I'm going to hang out with Jesus. So people were very against being dissected or having, or cremation or any whatever. They wanted to be buried complete so that they could be resurrected complete. And the only bodies they could get for dissection were like condemned criminals. And so there became a black market for dead bodies. And then they started like this, the first song, Defenders of the Grave, that's what it's about, because they started devising these special locks, and they would have guards at the cemeteries to like stop these resurrectionists, that's what they were called, from robbing graves and selling bodies. And anyway, so Burke and Hare being like, well, we're not bright enough to outwit all these security measures, but what if we just killed, like, this is way easier. You just kill some itinerant worker and boom, we just, made a month's worth of wages in like one night,
That's fucking scary, dude. I'm sure there's still a black market for dead or for bodies and general. But anyway, but this is also the first time too that you unveiled your mascot essentially as well, if I'm not mistaken, at least on the front cover.
Exactly. We got a lot of problems with the Necrocracy cover. We wanted one art direction. Relapse wanted something different, and they pitched us the first cover. We rejected it. We pitched them a cover concept. They rejected that. And finally, that was one of the many delays with the record. And so we kind of, well before we started recording, we talked to Orion Landau, who's the guy that painted the album cover. He also painted The Storm Before the Calm by Decapitator, and he's been like the Relapse head designer for years. And excuse me. So we're like, we need to nip this in the bud this time. Like, we're going to be ready. This is what we want. It's a movie poster. And if you look at the cover, especially if you have the LP with the poster, first you'll see Dylan as Dr. Filthy, the main sort of focal point. But in the painting, you'll see all four of us. I'm in there, Ross is in there, Mike is in there, and Bud is also in there. And it looks like, you know, a Hammer horror kind of poster, and the whole album, you know, with the little segues and stuff, has sort of a Hammer horror kind of, you know, so it's got a British horror vibe for sure. You know?
Totally. And it also has the creases in it, so it's like authentic enough to make it seem like it's a horror poster and whatnot. And
right.
Did you have a concept in mind of like did you have a specific horror movie that the poster represented to you or wanted to look like?
Not necessarily. I mean, really, I was seeing more of like the adventure movie posters of the 80s, you know, even like, you know, Indiana Jones or The Empire Strikes Back or whatever, where it's sort of like a montage of all the characters, or like the Labyrinth poster, for example.
And I think those were all done by the same guy, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was.
I certainly believe they were designed by the same company because they're all kind of similar in composition. I know the Empire one that I'm thinking of, I believe, is Boris Vallejo. I don't know, but I just, I wanted people to look at it and think movie, but I wanted to sort of throw in more elements. Usually, like the best horror movie posters kind of have one element. It's just Herbert West with the syringe, or the skull with the eyeballs from Evil Dead, or the lady, or Evil Dead 2, the lady coming out of the grave for Evil Dead 1. It's just like sort of one focal point.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted something that was a little bit more kind of a little more nuanced, a little more detailed, because I just didn't think that you could get a sense of the story from, you know, from just one image.
Absolutely. And I think it's brilliant that you now have a mascot that you can do anything you want with.
Right.
I mean, much like Iron Maiden or Megadeth or whatever else. So it's cool that but it's interesting that you introduced him so almost late in the game for you, because it's like 30 years after, you know.
Well, we were kind of reluctant, you know, because we're like, is this too cheesy? And generally, you know, my philosophy is that usually the answer is no. Like, you got to push at least one step beyond like what would be considered good taste or like smart thing to do. That's what we always talk about in Pounder. We're like, whatever we do, it's like, if this is the boundary for what makes sense, it's like, let's just go a little bit further. Like, no, that'd be stupid. Like, perfect, let's do that. And we were kind of reluctant to do it, but I think it just made a lot of sense. And it kind of, you know, with him on stage, it sort of has a continuity between the old days when we used to like spit out live worms on people in the 90s and shit. And, you know, even the early records where Cole would get covered in blood and he'd be like standing on his bass drums with like 2 machetes in the air and stuff. So it, you know, it's a way to sort of carry that forward, but without having to deal with like trying to play guitar covered in blood, or like loading out your gear and like trying to like clean off a bunch of goo bullshit on it, you know, because then your guitar doesn't work the next night. It's a big hassle. So if you get a guy, you know, and the thinking was exactly Iron Maiden. Like, it was like, cool, we'll be like the super low budget, like ratchet Iron Maiden of death metal.
Absolutely. And you introduced new stage props during this time too. Like, I remember seeing you guys during I don't know, even 15, 16 era where you actually had microwaves on stage, I believe, and just all this weird kind of shit that I was like, this is awesome. It's a whole concept, you know?
Right.
It's like I'm going to die right now watching Exhumed.
I mean, the microwave is like a callback to the Gore Metal Kitchen. And then for the Death Revenge tour, we had like headstones with our names on it. But, you know, and it's also kind of difficult for a band at our size because some nights you can use all the staging, and then a lot of nights you really can't. And
the stage is like this big.
Right. You roll into a club and you're like, well, we can fit the drum kits, and that's about it. But, you know, it's something. When Ross was talking about coming back, or before Ross came back, and he and I were just sort of talking about what we were doing, I guess I should say. I just told him, I'm like, you know what, I'm into like arena rock. Like, I like listening to it. I like the spectacle. I like the scale. And I'm trying to find a way to deliver that in our world. And I guess apparently that was what made him click with him. He's like, oh, okay, I get it. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve on stage, you know.
Love it. And during this time too, you're a very busy man. I know we touched upon the gruesome, you know, the fragments of Psyche where Sean actually played drums on the track itself. So I'm not going to get too much into it just because we've already, you know, if you want to hear it, listen to part 3. But, you know, during this whole era, you toured for the Death Revenge, and then immediately, I mean, the next year is, again, a 2-album thing. You know, you released 2 records and literally in the same year. One being Twisted Prayers from Gruesome. And, you know, what was your initial, like, I don't know, concept for the Twisted Prayers? I know it's like, it's reminiscent of spiritual healing and whatnot. But, you know, it's always out of order too. I've noticed you always do it like a certain era at a certain point rather than it being Scream Bloody Gore and then Leprosy and then, you know, it's just all like out of order. How come you didn't start with the spiritual healing concept first? Because I know it's your favorite of the Death era. Well,
I mean, technically Scream Bloody Gore is my favorite, but spiritual is probably my second. I don't know that it's their best, but it's very close to me personally. The first record really is an amalgam of all of Scream, spiritual, and Leprosy, but it kind of by default falls more towards Leprosy, especially with the cover art and stuff. And really, when we were doing that, we had no inkling that there was a future for the band. I honestly thought, I mean, you know, I tell this all the time when I do gruesome interviews. You know, I told my wife, she's like, really, another band like this and that? And I was like, this is like a, you know, it's going to be like a novelty. Like, there's going to be like a small group of people that probably really like it, a small group of people that really hate it, and then most people won't care. Like, we might play a show, maybe like a festival or something. Well, I was, you know, I've been wrong lots of times. Anyway, the record turned out to do really well, and it was clear that sort of the project had legs. And so we thought, well, shit, you know, if we had it to sort of do over again, we would have done Dimensions of Horror first, and then Savage Land, and then Twisted Prayers. And really, Fragments, you know, was just sort of like a teaser because the next record is going to be more like Human. So once we got to Twisted Prayers, we're like, okay, now we're kind of just going to go in order. But it really was just a case of not really thinking about the future when we did the first record, or thinking that we had no grand plan. It was just like, oh, we get to make a record of these songs? Like, this is great. And then it was like, well, okay, shit. Now what?
Right.
So it was kind of weird because there's like, you know, we do our little kind of callbacks to the source material. And Savage Land has callbacks to all 3 of the first albums. And so that was one of the reasons why Dimensions of Horror ended up being an EP, because we already kind of did the Zombie Ritual intro with Trapped in Hell. Right. And it was like, well, fuck, there's no room for a Zombie Ritual callback on Dimensions because we already did it. So with Twisted, I felt like at least we kind of had like real firm footing going into it. I wanted to write a couple more songs for Dimensions and make it a full length, but I was outvoted. Just in case everybody thinks I'm like some merciless dictator, which I've heard before, but I'm not. I was outvoted.
You're just a dictator. We get it.
I'm more of a benevolent director, I think. That's what you have to ask the other guys, but
I'm just giving you shit, dude. Don't worry about
it. Yeah, with Twisted, we knew exactly what we wanted, and again, like it was interesting because there was a lot of preparation with Death Revenge, and we used Jared Pritchard, who had done Dimensions and also did Twisted Prayers. And I did all this research, I did this historical research on the story and yada, yada, yada. And I was like listening to all these musicals, trying to like get ideas about vocal structure and stuff. And Twisted Prayers, there was also a lot of research. We really kind of strived to make a record that just sounded like the lost tracks of spiritual healing.
Right.
Like production wise, I know Jarrett, huge props to him for this. He called Scott Burns and was like, yo, Scott, so when you guys were doing spiritual, like what microphones did you use? Like what kind of compression did you use? And even if, we don't have the vintage gear from, 1990, we can at least use the right emulators and we can sort of set things up in a way that's going to sound like really, really sonically similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a big thing that makes that record succeed is the work that he did, and the way the songs were presented, especially because with Savage Line, nobody really saw it coming. And we just kind of were able to just be like, hey, cool. And Twisted, people, the expectations were higher simply because, people had liked the first record. So we felt like if we're really going to do this, it has to be, the same level of quality as the source material. And we had to go even further in sort of making it faithful. We used the Randall, what the fuck is it? The E250 or whatever. Dan has it. I don't know. It's an old Randall solid state amp, which is one of the amps that Chuck used in addition to the valve state on that record. So it, on one hand, we had a lot of fun just playing songs that sound like spiritual healing and writing them, and we all like it. But on the other hand, like it was something that we took really seriously in terms of trying to make it a sonic continuation of another album, which is not as easy as it sounds.
No, especially if a 30-year difference when all the equipment has changed and upgraded. So.
Sure. I mean, and it's like, in a perfect world, no disrespect to Jared, because he did it, especially on that record, he fucking knocked it way out of the park. If we could have gone to Morrisound and recorded with Scott, like we would have. But it's not the same studio anymore. It exists, but it's owned by the Trans-Siberian Orchestra guys, and I know the board is not there. I don't think either of the Morris brothers works there. Scott hasn't produced records in years. So I think everybody kind of came together and really made it as authentic as it could be, which probably played into the things that people hate about the band, that hate Gruesome, but also played into the things that people like about the band that like Gruesome. So,
right. Well, Gruesome is your thing. You're doing it for you. So I wouldn't even worry about people that don't like it because they don't understand what the project's about, and they probably never will. Now, I know you used Ed Repka for this specific cover again, if I'm not mistaken. Right. It's totally reminiscent of the actual album cover. So again, everything's authentic to that specific era of death and whatnot for this project. I guess going forward, is it your intention to keep using the same kind of artists that originally did the Death album covers for each of them? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to the human one then.
That's the next one.
So let's go to Pounder. I know you've had this project in the works for a long time. When did it actually when did the concept actually come into play for you?
Well, it started as like sort of joke band name that I used to tell people at random podunk gas stations on tour, just because I thought it was a funny name. I was like, it's so metal, but it's just also kind of goofy, like, except, like, what does that really mean? Like, that's just a weird band name. Loudness, like, that's another name that's just kind of goofy, right? And I love both bands. Anyway, so I've been listening to, a fair amount of traditional metal for quite a while, since like 99, 2000 was when I kind of started getting into, like, Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Tank, Holocaust, Tigers of Pantang, Riot. And I'd wanted to do something like that for a while. And Alejandro and I, he had been working with us on tour, and we were talking about doing something, and he was like, I like this idea. This is going to be fun. Like, I can get behind this. So he kind of pressured me, like, come on, dude. Like, I know you got some riffs. And so I came up with a few songs. Like, I guess this is like 2014-ish, 15, like somewhere in the Necrocracy kind of time. Some of the songs from the demo, like Give 'Em the Hammer. Actually, Spoils of War was from the new album, is one of the ones I wrote pretty early on. Anyway, and so we had these songs, and we demoed them, and we thought they were pretty good. And the idea was always like, well, we just need to find a singer, And we had a couple different ideas, some of which were better than others, but none of them really worked out. And so it was just kind of like this thing that, like, oh, we got to do it at some point. And then at the first, I want to say it was the first Frost and Fire Fest in Ventura, the first Frost and Fire Fest, so that 5 times fast. I met Tom Draper, our guitar player, who now also plays in Carcass. Tom is English. My wife is English. It's definitely like a radar thing. Like, if a British person hears another British person, like, oi, And anyway, so I ended up, he was just hanging out with some people in our hotel room, just listening to tunes, having a couple drinks, and I found out he was an Angel Witch. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's like, actually, I met you before. Like, my friend interviewed you, but I didn't really say anything because whatever. I was like, oh, cool. And he lives in the Bay Area. And then we went up to the Bay, my wife and I, to see Enforcer, Cauldron, and Warbringer. And
oh yeah, Next Mortis. I remember that tour.
Yeah, Next Mortis. That's right. I was like, I knew there's somebody else. And anyway, so I was talking to Tom at that show, and he's like, with all your projects and stuff, I'm kind of surprised that you haven't come up with anything like this. And I was like, well, actually, funny that you mentioned that. And so I think I had his email or whatever, and I was like, hey, like, if we were just talking and it was just drunk talk, totally fine. But I do have some songs. If you want to hear them, I'd love for you to hear them and see what you think. And I sent him whatever the first, 3 or 4 demos we had done were, and he's like, these are actually, like, pretty fucking good. And hearing Tom play, he was like, oh, I'll record some solos on these for fun. And he sent them back, and Alejandro and I talked to each other, and we're like, okay, like, this is the guy. Like, the iron is hot. We're gonna strike. And it just was like, well, we can't find a singer. So I guess I will attempt, and we'll see what happens. And so then we did the Heavy Metal Disaster tape, and then the Fast on Fire 7-inch, and then finally the Uncivilized record.
Well, so even before this, thinking of the concept, did you ever feel kind of pigeonholed to be, because you're like considered, at least in my eyes, the death metal guy, as Scott Burns was, right? But you kind of persevered through it and just said, "Fuck it, I'm just going to give it a shot." But did that notion ever come into play when conceptualizing Pounder? I
mean, it only, as far as like writing the stuff, not at all, like, not even for a second. It only really kind of came into play, especially after going to the first couple Frost and Fire gigs and stuff, and meeting a lot of people that were also into this. That's when I guess it kind of came into play for me, because metal is very cliquey, and that scene is very cliquey, and I was like, very conscious of people being like, well, I don't want to hear a new heavy metal band featuring members of, especially when Tom got in Carcass, it's like that's an even more recognizable name. And you know, I don't want to hear some Weekend Warriors shit like these guys think like what I love is just like a laugh. They're just gonna do it for fun. And it's like, no. Like I fucking live for this stuff. Like you don't, you know. So that was really my concern, was that the audience, that niche, was gonna be like, oh, these guys are posers, I don't want to hear it, before they even heard the record, you know. The first album, I do think, kind of ran into that. The second one, it seems to have been overcoming it. It's hard to tell because it came out during the pandemic, but I know it's sold better than the first one, and we've sold more copies of the first one subsequently, and so on and so forth.
And we should mention this too, because I do want to mention the Fast and the Fire EP for a couple of different reasons. For one, it was the first time that on my radar that Pounder released anything, you know. And I bought the 7-inch single. I still have it. It still rules. I still love the track. But another reason too, we should also mention, you know, Carlos, who drummed, who was the drummer on the record too, and pay some sort of tribute to him, because I know he's, you know, unfortunately he's no longer with us. But just, can you walk me through even just meeting him and asking him to fill in? How did you guys know each other?
Oh, this is another instance where I think my wife deserves some credit, because she had seen him play with either Salvation or Widow in England a few years back, and she met the guys, and she was like, oh, like I know these dudes, and you know, Carlos is super nice, like he can, you know, and he's just always down to do something fun. And you know, so I talked to him, and I was like, well, hey, like, would you be into just doing this? Like, we'll pay for you to go to the studio. And you know, it was like super cheap. I don't even know what it was. And he was like, yeah, it'd be fun. And he played our show at the second Frost and Fire Fest. And actually, we recorded Heavy Metal Disaster and Faster Than Fire at the same time. So our first time in the studio, we recorded 7 songs. And, you know, I didn't really, it's weird because we released a tribute song to him and stuff. I didn't know him super well, but meeting him just a few times, he was the kind of guy that I just knew. I was like, if this guy lived in the same town, like we would be best friends. Like he lives on in a beach town, a small beach town like San Luis Obispo, except it's in North Carolina. He's always outside. He loves the beach. He loves to surf. He loves rock. He loves metal. He loves cheesy 80s movies. He was super friendly and just like really, I mean, beyond easy to work with. And, you know, I don't know, because of the band situation and stuff, like, I don't know that if we would have continued working with him because of the bi-coastal thing. I mean, who's to say? But it was just, you know, it's somebody that I'm really glad that I got to spend a little bit of time with and I got to meet. And, you know, he kind of just came in at the right time. And yeah, like we all instantly got along with him, you know, because we're all really good friends in the band. And it was kind of like, if you like one of us, like you're probably going to go along with all of us. And he only did the one gig with us, but yeah, it's intense because he was such a very active guy. He played in multiple bands, and he worked, and he surfed, and he was like, you know, at Frost and Fires in Ventura. He's like, oh, cool, I'm going to go jogging down the beach this morning before, and I'll meet you guys after. And, you know, then it all of a sudden just died from a fucking brain aneurysm. It was just literally like one day totally okay, next day, which I guess maybe is the way to go, but it's fucking tragic, man, you know?
I know. And like I said, I wanted to pay some sort of tribute to him and the legacy that he left, you know, with you and whatnot. And I'm just kind of curious too, can you, if you can even answer me this, you know, his playing, how was his playing, you know, different than say most of the other drummers that you've jammed with? Did he offer anything new that you kind of learned from him?
I mean, he offered like a real straightforward power groove. You know, every musician you play with brings something different to the table. You know, what Gus did on the Uncivilized record is obviously a lot more technical than what Carlos did. Carlos was very much like a rock drummer, you know, like
a Phil Rudd or something.
I would say more like somewhere between like Clive Burr and like Vinny Appice, like kind of like,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
I'm not trying to like downplay his skill at all.
No, dude, there's a pocket players, man. You need them. You need
Right.
pocket players.
And he was very like, he played for the rhythm. Like he didn't just be like, hey, and I can just throw in all this shit here. And then, but then, you know, he would just sit down and play some pretty badass shit. Like, oh, okay, cool. This is just his style, you know? And I think if we had continued working with him, I think it would have worked better doing more sort of like Screaming for Vengeance, kind of like Killing Machine type stuff, you know? Whereas I think what we ended up doing was a little bit more finessey or whatever. Just coming from a death metal background, it's kind of like feels like underplaying to play like, you know, Rock Forever or whatever, some of those old Priest songs. But you know, mostly I think the biggest impact was just his personality, because he was just a really fucking cool guy. I mean, like everybody's the same after they're dead or whatever, but he was just a really good dude. Like everybody was like, oh, that's so cool. You have Carlos play. Like he's such a great guy, you know, like Nick from Waste and stuff knew him, and it's like, oh, that's so great that you had him, man. He's super cool. And he played with Vulture with Ryan Waste's band before Bat. Apparently he only names his other bands after like flying things. But anyway, and so that was, you know, they all totally vouched for him. They're like super psyched. They're like, oh, he's gonna be great. Like you're gonna love him. And I told him, was like, he's great. I love him. So
Absolutely. And then you know, Uncivilized, you know, he comes, like I said, in 2019, it's another year of the twos for you. You released 2 records this year, this particular year, one being Uncivilized. And like I was telling you, either off air or during air, you know, I felt the vocals were just severely like under in the mix for me. I wanted the vocals to be like at a much higher level, which hopefully that'll be rectified in the near future. Because I thought your vocal performance was really good, you know.
Oh, thanks. But you're not wrong. That was an intentional choice. I mean, I never, you know, I'm very aware that I'm not Michael Kiske or Jeff Tate or Ray Alder or John Arch or even John Bush for that matter. And I think I was very self-conscious about that, because it's kind of tough going from, you know, doing death metal stuff where I can pretty much, if I like, I imagine the way that it's going to be, and then I record it, and then that's the way it is. It's like, all right, cool. Or, you know, very close. With this, it was kind of like, well, I imagine the way it could be, but like, holy shit, man, like, fuck, this is really hard. And I think it was a big learning curve in a lot of ways, because first I had to learn how to write vocal melodies.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I had to learn how to, you know, I can karaoke and stuff, but I had to learn how to sing those melodies. And then the problem was the melodies I was writing weren't the right melodies for me to sing. They were the right melodies for, you know, Bruce Dickinson to sing or somebody else. But if you're all the time at the top of your range, you're really in big trouble, because it's, you know, like you're really forcing out the notes. Whereas if you're singing in your middle range, you have a lot of flexibility. And so the first record is really plagued by my inexperienced choices as far as writing the melodies. And because of that, and because I felt uncomfortable with it, I hadn't identified that was a problem yet, but because I just didn't feel comfortable with the performance, I specifically was like, yo, turn the vocals down like 3 dB or whatever. And everybody has said, oh, the vocals are buried, you know, the vocals are buried. And it's really funny, because like I love like records like Crystal Logic or King of the Dead and stuff where the vocals, I mean, I wouldn't say they're good.
I fucking love Crystal Logic.
Right.
I've been getting into Manila Road a lot lately, so.
But I'm just saying, like Mark Shelton, R.I.P. and everything else, he is not Rob Halford. Like he is not.
No, but not everybody should be Rob Halford. Exactly. You know, that's the whole point.
And I like bands that don't have technically great vocals. However, my own vocals, I was like not willing to sort of take the chance on people being able to commit to it like that. So the vocals are buried, and that's something that I take responsibility for, because the first mix had the vocals at a much more normal level. And that was, that's one of those things where in hindsight, I would not do that.
So how did you kind of rectify this situation? Meaning, like, did it take, you to start doing live shows to kind of feel more comfortable as a vocalist, singing wise?
For sure. I mean, it was a mix of live shows and just kind of like doing my own sort of post-mortem on the first record. I really believe in the band. It is a band. It's not like a side project. It's not a laugh. It's something that I really believe in. And I think our songs are, stand up to anybody that's making this kind of traditional metal right now. But it was a case of really just learning and seeing more and kind of accepting, like, hey, man, because my first thought was like, oh, well, I just need to practice more and I'll develop my range, which totally would have been true if I was like 24 and hadn't been singing death metal vocals for 2 years. Because ultimately, like, my entire throat is coated in scar tissue. Like, I don't know why you would ever do this, but if you ever were to feel the sides of my larynx, like, it feels like there's like rocks in there. Because my whole throat is just scar tissue. And even some of the vocal ranges in growling, I can no longer do because I've been doing this for too long. And like the old decapitated, like haunted by evil, like I can't do that anymore. That's
right.
So I, kind of had, after the record, I sort of had to admit defeat and be like, all right, look, this is not the kind of thing that you can develop. It's not like if you practice sweep arpeggios, you'll get good at sweep arpeggios. It's like,
right.
You can practice this till you fucking blue in the face, but like, you don't have the physical tools to do it. Just like slam dunking. I can fucking play basketball for 2 hours a night. I will never slam dunk. It's like I'm a fucking flat-footed, knock-kneed, 45-year-old white dude. Like, not happening, bro. And so on the second record, I was able to sort of regroup. And it's a shame because I think the songs on the record on Uncivilized are super strong. And like the ballads, especially, like, had I written the melodies a little bit different, I could have given a stronger performance that would have helped make the songs more convincing, because like Answer the Call, I mean, if I was making my own greatest hits record, I mean, that's like a song that for me is like, wow, that's like really like me, dude. Like, that song gets me. And it's just, I still think the record is good. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody that's on the fence about checking it out. I think it's a strong album full of really good songs, great riffs, and especially the guitar solos and the harmonies and stuff. But it was a big learning experience for me as a vocalist. And hey, if you like fucking heavy metal albums with rough vocals like I do, you'll probably dig it,
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of personality in your voice, and I think that's the one focus that every vocalist should kind of focus on, is just that personality. Because we all know, and I love Bon Scott. I mean, even to me, Bon Scott isn't the greatest singer, but to me, he's one of the greatest singers ever, because of his personality.
Absolutely. And I think really, like that, there's so much to be said for really just letting that come through. I mean, I think the hardest thing, especially in underground metal, because most underground metal fans like hundreds of bands, like we all do, and to get a fan like that to hear your band and instantly be like, oh, look, that's so and so, because I recognize only he does this,
right?
It's like Metallica is my favorite band, and people talk shit about Lars's drumming all the time, and I'm like, you know what, dude?
I don't know, man.
Whatever you think about his drumming, whether he's good or not, it's him. You know what I mean?
I always credit him, and maybe this is a weird correlation. I always thought Lars was like a Ringo Starr, because I think Ringo Starr is really a really good drummer that most people don't think that, and I'm like, I can't disagree with people more because of his particular style. Because if you think about it, during like that whole 60s, like nobody was playing traditional like Ringo. He kind of changed the whole game for as far as drumming, right? So that's just, you couldn't have the Beatles without Ringo Starr. No matter what. I've heard Metallica with Dave Lombardo, and I'm like, it's great, but it doesn't sound like Metallica to me. Do you know what I mean?
It sounded like it was like, because I watched that same show on YouTube. I'm like, okay, I got to hear Battery with Dave Lombardo on drums. It's probably amazing. And I was like, I can't say it's not good, but I can honestly say, like, I don't like it.
Right. That's my whole point, though, right? That's why the correlate. But, you know, I mean, I love, you know, Brian Johnson, Bailoff, Sean Keelan. Like, those are vocalists that have a lot of personality in their voice. They might not be the best to other people, but to me, they're the best at, you know, for what they do, right? And
I mean, Bailoff.
Mustaine isn't the best either, and I love Mustaine's voice because I know it's Dave every time I hear him sing, you know?
Right. Those guys, I mean, those three, Bailoff, Mustaine, and Killian, not so much Mustaine, but I mean, it's almost just all personality. Like Bailoff, I don't think could sing a note. Like if you told him, like, sing this pitch, he'd be like, ah! You're like, oh, not what I asked at all, but that was perfect, you know?
Right.
He's one of my favorite singers, and he's technically an awful singer. I don't care. Yeah, he's the best. You know what I mean?
Like, exactly. So, don't care. Just
right. So I think it just, you know, it's one of those things that feels unnatural leaning into that as someone that's been making records for a long time. If you're like 19 or whatever, like, fuck it, man. It's a little bit different. You know, I don't know how, I can't think back how old I was when Uncivilized came out, but probably 40. You know, I mean, I'm 45 now, so probably 40 or older. It's like, it's a little harder to lean into that because you're like, I've been doing this a long time. I'm like, I should be doing it at X level after all this time, and to sort of be like, no, I'm just going to get by on like attitude, bro. I spent a long time kind of like unlearning that because it was a big stumbling block in my career earlier on. So, but that, I mean, that kind of is the way, and you can hear it a lot more on the second record. The vocals are at a normal level, and, you know, it's just, you know, it's a much better mix overall.
It sounds like Matt Harvey to me. So now this record kind of went under my specific radar. Was the horror record from Exhumed. You know, Can you talk to me a little bit about even just the album cover itself? It's like super, I don't know, interesting to your career itself, because it's like even the color scheme is super unique. You know, I haven't ever seen a bright Exhumed record before this. So can you just walk me through your specific concept? And again, adding, you know, the mascot to it is a huge plus.
I think, you know, horror was kind of a sleeper record for people because I think, you know, especially when we were doing All Guts and Necrocracy, there just wasn't a lot of death metal really happening. And in the intervening years, there have been, every year there's more and more death metal and more quality death metal records coming out. And, you know, as fans and, you know, also the press, you know, it's always more exciting to be like, whoa, look at this new thing that just came out, rather than like, look at this old reliable band still doing stuff. You know, I even had buddies of mine who were like, you know, 6 months after the record came out, they're like, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, I slept on this, but the record's really good. I just wanted to tell you, man, I finally checked it out. And I was like, well, thanks. I mean, 6 months later, but okay. With horror, you know, it was very much like a response to Death Revenge. I think, you know, if Death Revenge had really taken off and, you know, people had gone crazy for it and everyone thought we were geniuses, we probably would have done another concept album, and we would have done more with the sort of, you know, film score, interludes, and all this stuff that was going on that record. And the record did good, like, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like, you know, it's always just sort of like a steady, slow upward thing. It's not like boom. And so Death Revenge was really about making it an Exhumed record and adding as much as we possibly could to it without making it not an Exhumed record. And horror was the exact opposite. Horror was about taking away as much as we possibly could while still making it an Exhumed record. And I wanted something really simple for the title. And I just thought, like, you know, I was thinking back to when we started the band, and we used to watch a lot of horror movies. That's what we would do. We'd all work these like retail jobs or work at a gas station or whatever. After work, we'd get together, we'd go rehearse for a couple hours, we'd get a pizza, we'd go to a video store, and you would be in a video store and you'd look, and then you'd see that sign that said horror, and you're like, I know where to go. And I was like, that's perfect. Like, you know where to go. Like, it's that simple. And so once we had that concept, the cover and everything else just was like almost took care of itself, because it was like, cool, this is a video store album. This is what it's like. It's like going into a video store in the 80s or the early 90s, a mom and pop store. And because that's where because they had to deal with independent distributors who would always foist these crappy, low grade horror movies on them. And anyway, so that was the vibe that we were trying to capture. And we worked with a guy named Mark Schoenbach, who also did the Uncivilized cover. Mm-hmm. And he was referred to me from Sven from Aborted, actually. And I loved his work. He does mostly film stuff. So, and he's a huge retro guy. So he knew, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have to explain what we were doing to him. And the cover, basically, I used to have this poster when I was a kid that was like a door poster of Eddie kind of breaking through your closet door.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
Yeah, he's like in ripped up jeans or whatever. And, he's like smashing through a white wall, and my closet door was white. So it's perfect. And I was like, well, let's just do something really simple, because the last album cover, like I said, was pretty nuanced. There's like this scene here, and then if you look, oh, that's Ross, oh, that's whatever. This was just like, let's just have one thing. That's the cover, and like it was a trip running horror movies, especially back then, because it would be like you'd have this really cool image of whatever, and then the box would have these like dumb stripes, be like Vestron Video or whatever. And so we're like, let's capture that whole vibe. And with those two records specifically, we worked really hard to integrate the album, the subject matter, the album cover, the staging, really everything, to where it's all part of a whole, and there's no real separation between the art of the music and the art of the record sleeve and the layout and so on and so forth. And my friend Rachel, who's a graphic designer, I was like, can you just do a mock-up of like the video sleeve of what this would look like? And she did the mock-up, and I was like, well, fuck, that's perfect. And this is what we ended up using on the covers. So between her and Mark, it was just like we had exactly what we wanted. And, and then Relapse came out with this really cool box set for it, where you got like a record box that looked like a VCR, and then you got the album itself, the audio of the album on a VHS tape. And I was just like, this is incredible. I don't even have a VCR anymore. My broke years ago. But I was just like, this is such a cool fucking package. And the artwork was so cool. And, it just was really, it all made sense. It was one of those records where we set out to do something, and then that's exactly what we did. It was very satisfying in that respect,
And you said that this was a response, and I'm just kind of curious too, was it also a response to some of the new death metal bands coming out? And
not really. I think it was more, I always kind of, when I'm making records, I think back to when I was in high school, and like living and dying, like when Death changed the logo, like I got really mad. And I was at a party and someone handed me the Human tape, and I was like, this is for posers, because it didn't have drippy blood, and I threw the tape at the wall. I was like, you guys are listening to this, you're fucking losers, and I left. Like, I just think back, like when I was like living and dying for this shit, and I was thinking, like, what would that annoying kid think was cool? And with Death Revenge, it was really melodic, and it was very expansive, and I just thought, like, can we do like just a fucking like ripper grindcore album? Like, do we still have that? Like, do we still have the balls to just be like, yeah, okay, cool. we prove we can do these like dual guitar harmonies, and we can do a 9-minute instrumental, and we can fucking write a whole concept album that's all historically accurate. But do we have the guts to really just put it on the table and do something that's like balls out, no frills, you know, just fuck you from the first second to the last second. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do, you know.
Love it. Now let's go to what I have as your final album, which was the brand spanking new. I mean, like within the last, I don't know, 2 to 3 months, Breaking the World from Pounder. This is still probably my favorite Pounder record so far.
Thank you.
I really felt, vocally speaking, a huge, you found your kind of groove in this specific style of singing, which was truly awesome and inspirational for me personally, just because I've followed your career for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. So it's kind of cool to see, like, your favorite vocalist doing something different and it works for them. You know what I mean?
Thanks.
So I really feel like you found your niche with this one. Love the album cover. I love the
again.
What's up?
Mark Schoenbach again coming through, delivering the goods.
Absolutely. And I know it's like as cliche as possible, but it just works so well with like the world and it's just the whole concept of it just works because it just screams heavy metal. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, Breaking the World goes back to like 15 years ago, gas station days. People will be like, "Oh, so you're always talking about this Pounder band?" I'm like, "Oh, I was like, yeah, dude, we're gonna do an album. The first one's gonna be called Welcome to the Night." And then that ended up being a Night Demon song, which I thought was amazing. And then I was like, and then the second album is going to be Breaking the World. And
fucking awesome, dude.
They just started laughing. I was like, yeah, dude, it's going to have these like fists like crushing the world with these disembodied eyes watching. And they're like, this is so metal. It's great. And, so that's what it was. Yeah, I love the record cover, and I'm definitely happier with the album. It was weird doing it because it was supposed to be an EP, and we sent it to Shadow Kingdom, and they're like, "Well, you're basically one song shy of an album." And we're like, "Well, we're not going to make an album that short, but we'll give you like 3 more songs or whatever." Because they were like, "Oh, people are really liking these like short albums," and I was like, "Well, we can't make a fucking 21-minute album. Like we got to break the 30-minute mark to really make it an album." And we had the songs written, like we have most of the next album already written.
Right.
And so we kind of just, with Pounder, it's cool because you have songs that sort of scratch different itches, and so we try to balance, like, cool, we need like a mid-pace song, we need a slower song, we need this and that. And so we just kind of looked at the songs that we had written and picked the ones that sort of best filled up what we thought the EP was missing. And so, like, Gus from Gruesome plays drums on some of the songs. Our buddy Adam from Cartilage plays drums on a couple of songs. Lots of it is recorded at different times. So it's sort of it's really surprising how cohesive the record.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. It's kind of awesome that it's like it feels like a total package record. I always felt like the songs on this record though are so much stronger for me personally than Uncivilized. That's why the next one, hopefully it's gonna, I'm sure it'll be just as good, if not better, right?
We hope. That's the idea.
All it needs is like a ballad,
Right. I mean, we have a couple ballads written, and I think one of them we all sort of agreed was a little bit too 80s, like too Mutt Lange, like Hysteria kind of, which I'm a huge fan of, but it was a little bit too soft. So I think I'm pretty sure the one we're going with is a little bit more. It's somewhere between like a Queen song and like something that would be on like Blood, Fire, Death, which makes no sense, but it's gonna make sense. I hope. I think.
So this will be the first time too in your career that you've ever done kind of a ballady type of song. How are you going to approach this differently than, say, a mid-paced or fast track? Are you going to dive back into your records and kind of emulate, this vocalist and try and be like, oh yeah, I can do that, and that?
I mean, at this point, I think I've kind of found how I'm going to be able to sing and make it convincing, because I can sing like a nice song. Like it's good enough to be like pretty good at a karaoke bar, and you think like, oh, that's pretty good. And then you record it and listen and you're like, no, that's shit. So it's going to have to be a throaty, harsh, like, just like, a lot of people hate the song. I don't know. I don't hate it. I don't know if it's great, but like I Ain't No Nice Guy by Motorhead. It's just, Lemmy just sings the same way he always sings, right? He just happens to be singing, or like 1916, like he just sings how he always sings. He just happens to be singing over like a nice ballad. So I'm going to pretty much sing how I always sing and let the chips fall where they may,
Dude, who knows? It might be like what Watch the Children Pray was for Metal Church.
That was
we never know.
And
right?
That was the first Metal Church song I heard on Headbangers Ball as a kid.
That was the first Metal Church song I ever heard. So that changed my life. But anyway, no, I'm looking forward to that. But I'm just saying that song is kind of gritty too with the vocal style of David Wayne, even though, David Wayne is arguably one of my all-time top 5 favorite singers ever. So
David Wayne's amazing. Like he rules, especially the first record, but the second record is killer too. And I mean, was it Mike Howe that came?
Oh yeah, the first 5 Metal Church albums are untouchable for me.
I wasn't really super familiar with the first 3, but I like all 3 of them a lot.
Oh yeah, dude. Oh yeah. But dude, so that's your whole career. We did it in 4 hours. So, it's awesome. So
for now.
Yeah, for now. We'll get you back on. We'll get you back on soon enough. But can you give me all your links to find anything Matt Harvey related again, and where anybody can help support you? Because especially during this trying times, Breaking the World came out literally during the pandemic, and a lot of our records did. So I know a lot of us need the support. So where can people find anything Matt Harvey related merch?
As far as like merch and stuff, you can go to exhumed.bigcartel.com. We've got merch there from Exhumed, from Gruesome, from Pounder. And then as far as me personally, you can go to mattharveymustbedestroyed.com. I have my blog there, and just various other links to shit I'm doing. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/MattHarveyMustBeDestroyed. I'm also on Instagram at MattHarveyMustBeDestroyed. I'm not on Twitter or TikTok or anything else. It's too much. But and of course, Exhumed, Pounder, and Gruesome all have Facebook, Instagram. Exhumed has Twitter, and you can go to our respective record labels, Relapse or Shadow Kingdom, and find out more there if you are so inclined.
I love that. And hopefully the blog is still going to be super active like it once was.
Well, I need to do a bigger update, and I've kind of honed in on a subject to rant about, that I think is worthwhile and not something that I've seen repeated better or really well elsewhere. So I have the next long blog post it's rumbling. It's been rattling around in my mind.
Love it. And lastly, what are you up to nowadays? I see like a microphone thing back there. Were you recording some vocals or some new records coming out, or what's going on in your world right now?
So Exhumed is about 65, maybe 70% done with the recording of our 8th full-length album.
I can't believe that, dude.
I can't either. And that will probably come out either at the end of the year or more likely sort of early next year. We're very excited because we played our first show 30 years ago this year. And to celebrate, we've asked some former members of the band to write songs for the new album. So in addition to my songs, Ross wrote a song, Sebastian wrote a song. We have some former members like Mike Beams, Bud Burke, Matt Widener and Leon Del Muerte all wrote songs for the album. So I think, it's again, like Desert Revenge was quite different from horror, and I think this album is going to be quite different from both. And, we're trying to keep it interesting for you guys and for us. And another project of mine that was active years ago called Scarecrow, featuring Will and Damien from Death Angel during the pandemic, and sort of celebrate the fact that Will didn't die from COVID-19 after being in a coma for 2 weeks.
Right.
We recorded some of the songs that we wrote back then, and that they will be coming out sometime in the next 2 to 4 months as an EP. It's very Bay Area thrash-tastic. So if you're into like Metallica, Exodus, also, Motorhead, New Wave British heavy metal, punk, you'll probably like it. And then the plan is for Gruesome to be recording a new album this year. I'll be in Florida in July, and I plan to sort of spend a week just woodshedding with the guys and kind of whipping the material into shape. We have a few songs and we have a bunch of pieces that we haven't really turned our attention to for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very determined to get the Gruesome record recorded this year, and time allowing, we may record a Pounder record this year, or it may end up being late in the year or early next year, because we just did a record. So there's no, it would be more just to have it ready in the barrel to fire when needed, rather than like trying to rush it out.
And I'm sad that like Sean isn't going to be able to help, with the Human Style record for Gruesome,
Yeah.
I know that's what the plan was for you, was
Right.
he was going to kind of help coach Gus and what he would do on a part like this. And so that kind of sucks, dude.
It was a big setback, like not just in terms of like, like we were going to fly him to Florida. He lived in California for a year before he passed. We were going to fly him to Florida and just have him sit in on the whole session and be like, hey, when we were doing Hema, we did this, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I think Paul had this preamp or whatever. And, that I think emotionally that was a real big sort of stumbling block that took a lot of steam out of our sails,
Right.
Because for Gus, it's like before, first Sean was like his favorite drummer. Then Sean was his drum instructor. And then they became like really fucking close friends. And, to do a record where you're already paying tribute to somebody that you're that close to and that emotionally involved with is already
gotta be tough.
Right. But then to have them die and to do it without their help and encouragement, and as a tribute, then the pressure is even more. And certainly the pressure is on for myself as a guitar player. Dan, he's incredible. He can play anything. I'm like, whoa, this is going to be like a little bit tougher to sing and play over, So I think, between Sean's passing and sort of the intimidation that Gus feels, and then how busy I am and a bit of the intimidation that I feel, we've allowed the project to slip to the back burner. And, I'm bound and determined, like I want to record it this year. And I think for me, the motivation, aside from paying tribute to Chuck, has sort of shifted, because now it's less about sort of preserving Death's legacy as a death metal band, because I think we've accomplished that. Now it's about sort of proving to myself and the death metal scene or whatever, that's like, hey, like I can do this, like I may not be the best guitar player out there. I'm not fucking homeboy from Necrophagist or Obscura or whatever, but I can do this too. Like, I got to look at myself like, the everyman trying to fucking scale the mountain with a Rocky IV montage thing or whatever. So that's sort of my personal motivation to get the fucking record done this year.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes here and doing this with me. It means so much, dude.
Pleasure. Thank you
so
much.
Let's tell the links again. Matt Harvey Must Be Destroyed. What is it? .com. You can find all anything Matt Harvey related with Decapitator, Pounder, Gruesome, Exhumed,
Right.
and then make sure to go hit him up on Facebook or send him hate mail, whatever it is, that, or love letters or hate mail. I don't know. I'm sure he'll like both. So,
Right
Matt,
along.
thank you very much.
Creative, I'm down with it. It's fun.
But Matt, thank you very much again. I really appreciate it. Another episode of Poppitt's Corner. I'm out of here, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.